a very warm welcome, warm indeed. I hope you also enjoyed the warm weather this summer. Welcome back. After a short summer break, we're back with another episode of KQLCafe in August 2024. As always, your hosts, Johnny and myself, were happy to present KQLCafe for you and with you. And our agenda, as usual, is what's new in KQL, any updates that we came through. Then we have another very special guest, Truvis Thornton, who will speak about his life in KQL later. We then have something to learn. And of course, as always, what did you do with KQL this month? So let's get started with the news. So first of all, as we already mentioned, I believe 2 episodes ago, there is now a function or an option within the log analytics space where you can basically go to simple mode. This was designed by the product group for those people that are either on the phone and just have one hand left, or for those that are not yet so familiar with KQL, so that they can still, provided a table is already prepared for them, that they can run simple queries on that table. Now, one question that came up a lot is, because obviously the default seems to be now the simple mode, and especially for those people that are in log analytics more often, they of course get a little bit annoyed. So the product team was kind enough to share with us some hints on where to click within the Azure portal, so to make the simple mode no longer the default. We'll also share this in our show notes, including the screenshots. Then Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, the product team has released a blog post, and as a result, we have some additional detection capabilities. We are also getting a lot of new attributes in various tables. Let me quickly see. No, it's not there. So there's a number of additional attributes that you get in your tables. Unfortunately, the data is not yet synced to Sentinel. You might also get, I'm still working on that, that if it gets synced to Sentinel, it might have some data volume impact. Because we now have a number of additional attributes in multiple tables. And actually last night, Bert-Jan, he sent out a tweet where he encountered some difficulties while working with the data when using multiple where statements. I remember I promised to look into it, but I couldn't keep that promise today. But I remember that when I used one of the attributes that I didn't have one of the issue, but the other one I wasn't able yet to reproduce. So just in case you're querying those tables with the additional attributes, don't be surprised if you run into any KQL processing errors. We hope that in the next couple of days, at least, we can provide some more context on that. Now, what you basically
get... It's a good playground, though. Because with the data you already have, we can play around a bit with the to see if something is in a remote session or not, and that works quite okay without any large issues. But for all the good features, then I think we indeed need to wait a couple of days.
Yeah, and to give you some hints, what we're basically now getting is that when there is a remote session, that of course, provided Defender could identify the remote device, that we now also have clear information about the remote device IP address, the device name, etc. So that can definitely help. And you will see additional attributes populated across various tables like the device registry events, device process events, etc. So keep an eye on that. I'm sure it will not take too long until we see probably some initial queries appearing in KQLSearch.com. Then I just came across this. Copilot is everywhere. No show, no speech, no presentation without the word Copilot. So lately, I actually got more and more customers, who want to understand, how Copilot is used, or AI in general. So maybe as a little side note, just to repeat that, in the cloud app events or MCAS shadow reporting, Microsoft introduced about 3 months ago another category of about 400 AI type applications. So if you're interested in to understand and gather through KQL, who is using AI type applications, that can now also be queried. I'll be sharing some MCAS KQL queries probably within the next 24 hours. Since I was working on that lately. But getting back into the cloud app events itself, so there we will also see now an action type of Copilot interaction. So if you're interested in, and you will see in the event, it's always, at least what I saw across multiple tenants, a read activity. But you see where Copilot was used. So you see the workload. You can see, okay, someone probably used Copilot to go across his inbox items, or he used Copilot to go across his OneDrive, etc. So definitely also an interesting space to watch. And if I remember correctly, there are actually already some queries using this action type in KQLSearch.com. Good. Then the Entra ID team, within the release notes of what's new in Entra ID, I came across an interesting topic, and it didn't take too long until actually someone, and I apologize upfront, I bookmarked the link, but I couldn't find your original post in LinkedIn anymore. But someone actually pointed out an interesting query. Because devices haven't been updated since 2021, so that are missing a specific security update, they will report with this result type. I tried hard, but well, luckily none of the tenants where I have access to had a report on this. But yeah, if you're suspicious, or you know that in your environment you might have older clients that are missing patches, of course you can do so via Intune, Config Manager, Defender for Endpoint. But if you don't have all those tools in place, this is another way of at least identifying devices that would be really, really outdated since a long time that you might want to patch. Then, yeah, Stephen Lim, I guess you know him by now, especially if you have been on or are on LinkedIn. And he always, well, I don't know how he does it, but he is feeding KQL inspiration nearly on a daily basis. And for a long time, he had submitted all his queries, basically in LinkedIn, and then he started creating a LinkedIn page. And at some point, I took the courage and I approached him and said, Stephen, please, why don't you share all your goodness in a GitHub repo? So that has happened. Stephen Lim has now also a GitHub repo with all his KQL queries. And of course, to make things even better, that repo is also connected to KQLSearch.com. So you can search for the author here and look for Stephen Lim's KQL goodness that he's sharing with the world. And then I want to share another interesting update, especially for those dealing with the Microsoft security stack, more precisely Microsoft Sentinel. So actually there were 2 updates. We have now another log tier in Sentinel called the auxiliary logs. I haven't had the time to play with those, so I'm going to skip that. But there is also another very interesting feature, and that's summary rules. And the summary rules can basically either work with the auxiliary logs, or you can use those with existing tables, or even if you want to go to external data, or if you want to aggregate data that you have stored in Azure Data Explorer. So what's the whole idea? Well, the whole idea is that instead of running expensive queries across long or large data tables, that basically summary rules, as the word implies, allows you basically to summarize data. And of course, the summarization you will have to do yourself with the appropriate KQL query. And then you can store those results basically automatically into a custom table. So there are a number of use cases, like analytic reports. You might want to save costs. So let's imagine you have high volume data going in somewhere, but Microsoft refers to firewall and proxy logs. But basically, you're only interested maybe on specific patterns that you then want to process through analytic rules and that sort of things. So basically, you could now create a summary rule that goes to those basic logs or analytic logs or auxiliary logs, and basically pulls out the data you're interested in, and then you would put your detection rule, on that custom table that the summary rule creates. This is in preview. So very briefly, how is this working? Well, you have your data source. That can be an agent, that can be Azure resources, a data connector, any applications that ingest data, or your custom way of bringing data into Sentinel. Then usually, once that is ingested, it goes into the log analytics workspace, into the original table. So let's take an example here. You're collecting information maybe about MCAS or device activity on the network. And now, you want to have a specific summary. And I share an example that I prepared for this to make it easy. So once the data is ingested, you can now create a summary rule, and you can configure how often that summary rule is running. I think you can go down up to, 20 minutes.
Yes, 20 minutes is the low level.
Yeah, and then basically go up to 1 day. So basically it's up to you, how often you want to run that summary rule. And the summary rule basically then stores the results into a custom table that you also can define. So as an example, I try to, create a very easy example that everybody kind of understands without being a network engineer or dealing with proxy logs. So let's assume we're using Defender for endpoint, and we would like to understand on a daily basis, how is our exposure level across all of our devices. For those familiar with Defender, depending on the vulnerabilities that you have and other characteristics, Defender basically rates your device, and either, it has a low exposure level, a medium, a high, or none at all, ideally. Good. So I could, of course, run this query on a daily basis. I could, of course, also create a workbook and then do something like, summarize by Bing, time generated 1 day, etc. But, let's assume this will be a huge, table that consumes a lot of resources. And I just want to simplify that. At any time, I want to have the results available without having to run this whole query. Of course, this example might not really make sense, but what I try to do here is basically to explain the concept. So I can now create basically a summary rule. So within the Sentinel portal, you will find a new option on your configuration called Summary Rules Preview. And yeah, there you basically, give it a name, description, And when you create it from scratch, you will have the option to say, create in a new custom table. Now, what I'm not showing here, but technically what you could do, you could, of course, run multiple summary queries and store them in the same table. So you could have your, call it IT KPI table, because what it does, as it ingests the data, it's not only ingesting the results of your query, but it's also ingesting the name of your summary rule. So I hope you get it. You could run 2 summary rules, store the data into the same table, and basically you will then, when you want to work with the data, basically have to filter on your appropriate name to get just those records back that relate to the summary rule you want to work with the data. It's also recommended to enable the diagnostic log so that you can also monitor your summarization rules, like we have, the Sentinel health tables. So the Sentinel health diagnostic is now extended also with the summary rule, so you get some information. Did your rule run? What were the results, etc., or at least total. And then here, once you have created your rule, you can define how often it should run, a delay that it applies, and like everywhere in Sentinel, you can preview your results. So in this case, I get basically a summary of my low, medium, high, and none devices in that environment, and a timestamp that I defined. So the result of that is then, of course, I can now basically, this is my custom table. So it created a summary device exposure level custom table. And I can just query that and then, do my other crazy things with it. And if I run that, unfortunately, I forgot to add the latest screenshot. But basically, then in this case, you could monitor, whether things are going south or north with your exposure level. So this just a very simple example of usage of summary rules. Take a look into the documentation. Microsoft shared a couple of use cases around networking as well, or threat intelligence. So as an example, summarize all IP addresses that were identified throughout a certain time window where there was a threat intelligence hit, etc. Definitely worth looking this space. Good. And with that, I'm done with the news for now. And I would like to warmly welcome Truvis Thornton, who will speak about his life in KQL. Welcome, Truvis.
Thanks. It's great to be here, and thanks for the invite. It was most welcoming. All right, let me share my PowerPoint. I will try not to slideshow everyone to death here, but let's see. All right, let me grab this. Let's show. I haven't used PowerPoint in quite some time, so it's been a while.
No worries.
Oops. Go. Yeah, give me a second here. I believe that's the most recent one. There we go. No, that is my old one. I am sorry. Hold on. That's even older. I don't know where my recent one went to. Give me a second. Hopefully this means the demo gods will be with me and everything else, right?
We send praise to the gods. We had 3 chickens and a cow. Not a cow, but a chickens. I do not know where my recent PowerPoint went to. It should have auto-saved. Hold on one second. Because it is the 20th. I don't know, maybe it's saved on this PC. Gosh, that is the. It is not with me today. Well, the good news is people that are watching don't know what you're going to present. So for us, this is all good.
Oh, well, that makes me feel so much better. Oh boy. Well, I mean, I could just probably go through like an old one here, honestly, and just kind of like spend more time doing the demos, I guess, here.
Sounds good.
We'll do that. Gosh, so many good slides. Let me see what I can do here. All right. I'm just going to kind of like start from the top, and we're just going to kind of like run through a little bit of AuditD, because I don't know how much people have worked with or understand what AuditD is, but AuditD is typically something people either enjoy or mostly typically kind of hate. So I'm just going to like start from the top and just work my way down. And when I do find the latest PowerPoint slide, I'll dump that down and put up for download, because there's a lot of good content in there. And there's like a lot of links and stuff, but I'm just going to use this as a quick, run through just to kind of like explain all this. But anyway, so if you've not used AuditD, it's basically the way to monitor and audit Linux, because by default, Linux has absolutely no monitoring and auditing except an SSH connection in. So a lot of the commonalities that you can use for this is you can build detections such as, auditing access to a file and directories. We can also use it to, look for modifications and access attempts. And we can also monitor application executions. We can view command lines. It gives us a lot of insight into what's going on. And a lot of this is basically because it connects through the kernel. It's a little module that connects in, and we can evaluate the system calls and take a look at all of the, the application activity. It doesn't work with virtual kernels, so it has to be like an actual physical machine that's running Linux. But the two main concepts I really want to kind of like go over is just going to be the -W and -A, which will let you monitor file watching and syscalls. So a file watcher is monitoring the actual files being accessed and written to. So we have the ability to go to the file path and define permissions. And then on the syscall side, we have the ability to record the, the specific types of syscalls that there are. And then we can also define, other values such as, path, directory, and options like that. So an example here is a very basic AuditD config where we're monitoring, say, the cron, and then we're looking for, write access or attribute changes, and then we're, adding a -K to, tack on, a cron tag. And this means when we log the actual file into the events, we can, look for cron and realize, okay, it's associated to this, which gives us the ability to, quickly develop rules and use cases with KQL to, when we do an analytic rule, we can search for these specific labels, but we can also use these labels to filter out activity we do not want. So we can tag stuff that's going to be noisy, and we can filter out, whether you're using like a log forwarder such as syslog, cribble, whatever the case might be, we have that tag and we can filter that out as well. And that gives you the ability to also keep that data and, send it to a different location that might cost less, or we can send it to Sentinel and actually start using analytics around it. So it gives us that flexibility. And off to the left here, we have, ability to read, write, execute, and, change file attributes and so on. And then we'll go a little bit deeper to the config of the syscall. So for Linux, there's almost 500 something different syscalls that you can actually use. So commonly we have read, write, open, close, just to name the common ones. And this is when the system is, making an execution on that type of activity. So if you're reading a file, writing a file, that's the type of syscall you're going to see. Generally, the one syscall you really want the most is going to be the execv, and this is going to log binary executions, command lines being typed in as well. So because this can be very noisy and loud, the main syscall you're going to want to try and focus on capturing is going to be the execv, which we'll run through some examples on how that works. Quick examples, we can log everything. If you have like an unlimited budget, blank checks to Microsoft, this is not a bad way to go. I think I ran 30,000 something events on one machine within like a second at one point. The Azure agents are very, very loud and noisy. So that's one of the first things you tune out, just because it's always doing background activity. But if an example is you only want to log, the -S for the execv syscall, we can do it this way. We can also add a -F and define a user ID, which would be like UID equals greater than 1,000 if you don't want to log any of the system activity. Good ways to build around this is you can build up or build down, depends on if you want to log everything and exclude things, or the best case scenario if you're new to this is pick and choose what you want to monitor. So maybe you want to monitor shadow files being accessed, maybe you want to monitor, past WD being touched in some way. And as you build up, you can start moving into more and more loud and active tasks, and you can be more specific in terms of the syscalls you want to monitor.
I have a question.
Yes.
Just to understand, did I got it right? You mentioned in the very beginning that this does not run on virtual systems, but only on physical systems where Linux is installed?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so these will typically be your physical hosts that are running other infrastructure.
Yeah. So it's just because with the virtual kernel, you really can't install like a module into it because it's virtualized. So that's the only real limitation. I think there's some workarounds when you're dealing with Kubernetes and things like that, but I've not dabbled into that type of thing since very rarely do you really deal with like a virtualized environment. And if you do, you might be doing a different type of logging way. And there's other ways you can do some logging around that as well, which I can touch on as well.
Yeah. So what are your use cases that you encounter where people would still prefer or need to install Linux on physical boxes?
Say that one again.
So what are the use cases where, independent of this, where Linux would still, be needed to be installed on a physical box?
I mean, pretty much any Linux machine that's in production that has like any use case, like hosting files or services would definitely be something you want to deal with, because without any type of monitoring, you have no insight. Just give it a use case example. Before I was doing AuditD development for a company, they had a machine publicly hosted, and that machine had some dev software that was outdated, and it was constantly being exploited through an RCE for the past maybe 8 months. And the only reason that nothing came of that was because the firewall is actually blocking, outbound, based on, suspicious ports and stuff. So because of that, nothing bad happened. But without, digging into the actual monitoring, you would have no idea this type of activity is actually going on.
Small question about this, by the way. Is there maybe some confusion between containerized systems and virtualized systems? Because AuditD works fine on a virtual machine.
I think it works fine on virtual machines. I'm just talking like, say, if you're using like, OpenVZ or, some type of kernel system that's more on the virtual side. Not the virtual machines are fine. It's just when the kernel is like virtualized, like an OpenVZ system or a type of like a container system where the kernel, you don't have write access to the module.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is typically going to be.
That's where the confusion came from.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah. And in most cases, you probably really don't deal with a lot of, OpenVZ type systems anymore, but they used to be pretty prominent back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So back to the log structure here. So this is what the AuditD logs look like without any type of modifications or plugins or modifications. So they come in like just one column or one row is an event ID. And this one here, we're filtering out by the event ID, which is 213.179. And each one of these lines contains different information. So for this one, we have like the command line here happening. Down here, we've got some other information. This is supposed to come in with an actual name. I'm not sure why in this example they came in as a number. But each one of these types, and there's a bunch of different types, which I can show as well when I find the other PowerPoint. But the idea behind this isn't the best way to work with the AuditD events, because you have to correlate all these together within KQL, and that's going to use up a lot of CPU cycles. So we'll show a better way to actually get these events in. And I will say that when you start getting a lot of these events coming in, you have to use 2 CPU cycles to combine the events together, and then you have to parse them out. And by the time you do that, you're hitting the 10-minute timeout on Sentinel. And even if you do a 30-minute pool, you're still going to hit that just because of the sheer amount of events you have coming in. They have to, combine together just so you can actually search the event with an analytic. And the reason to be is the user information, the command line, the syscall are all different rows. So there's no way to actually do anything without combining them together, because if you do a search on one of the events, you don't know what user did it. So you still have to go back and find that information, and that's extra work on the analyst if you're sending them these events and they have to go digging through them. And I did do some initial blog posts on how to actually work with that on Medium, which will explain that concept, but I found that concept to be really outdated and not the most ideal way to do it. So the new, better way to do it is you can install Laurel on the host machine. And it's just an AuditD plugin. And all it's going to do is combine the events real time on the actual machine and then put it into a JSON object. And with the JSON object, you have your current working directory, your actual command line or execution commands here, you have path information, and then the syscall information. So it's all together, all nice in one object, which makes it easy to parse and also write analytics against, so you can actually find the information and create an alert as well. So this is very clean, and it makes it really easy because now you can type in a process ID and find all the events associated to that process. All right, so let me jump to the parser building for the Sentinel KQL side. So this here, we have the syslog.
Sorry.
Yes.
A small question about Laurel, because can you explain a bit about it? What is it?
Yeah. So really what it is a binary plugin that connects with AuditD. So I also have another article that explains how to install it, but by installing it, it's going to take the logs and the events from AuditD and send it to that binary. And then it's going to start combining all the different rows together by that AuditD ID, producing one JSON object that gets sent out. So instead of combining all the events together on the KQL Sentinel side, it's doing it on the host side. And then it sends it out as one nice object that you can actually reference. And it also has its own little config file that lets you take the labels and do some other filtering. So if you want to drop and not send to Sentinel based on the label that was tagged by AuditD, it has that capability to do that as well.
And then you use it instead of syslog, or do you?
It still gets sent out. Yeah, it still gets sent out through syslog. It's kind of like a middle ground or a proxy where it takes the logs, combines them, smushes them together into a nice object, and then it sends them out.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And I found that to be a lot easier to work with because it's all the information's in one. But so this is a parcel I put together, and all I'm really doing is renaming a lot of the event fields so it's clean and easy for an analyst to understand. So they know that this is the parent process ID and so on. And then I take all the command line information, which can be very generic, be very dynamic. There's an unlimited possibilities. I've seen them go as many as 50-something arguments. So I take this little concept where I pack the array together, and then I'm just stripping out all the array aspects. So it comes out as one clean string, and it looks as if that's what was typed in on the console. I also went a little step further, and I built a little lookup, get watch list, which will take the syslog information, which is right here. We have the ID and then the syscall name, and then I'm adding that into the query. So when it comes out, you can see what syscall was actually called instead of having to manually go look up the number. And the newer version actually added the description as well, which actually explains what that syscall does. So when you get an alert or you look up the events, you can actually see what that syscall actually is doing. And then an example here, I'm looking up based on process ID 871, and I'm getting all the events based off of that process ID through this parser that I made. And then also down here, I'm just doing a summarized counting, so I can see this process created this many different events and so on. And you can also do it based on the AuditD ID. So if you want to look at a specific ID for that event, you can look it up and look at the current working directory and so on. Another little tidbit of information too is the working directory is going to be where the script gets executed. So when you deal with looking up an RCE, if it's a web hit, that's most likely going to be the directory for that home or for that web directory, for that web app as well. So when you're looking at something like that, that's a good tell as to where the file was executed. And generally with the RCEs, they're going to be executed within the directory of the web app, where that might be. All right. And then this was creating a function where I'll showcase this one as well, but this is just getting all the events by a parent process ID. And I went ahead and I created a string value for an ID, a device, and I saved it as this. So I can now call, the ID that I want along with the host name. And the other thing to keep in mind too, when working with the AuditD events, is when you reboot the machine, the events will be set to 0. And when you also have multiple machines, you could also hit the same number across multiple machines. So it's always important to include the host name or the device name that you're working with. And with this function, I'm looking up this parent ID, and I'm also looking up this device, which will pull up every process that parent spawned. And it will also give me the syscall information and the command line arguments and anything else that's associated with the processes that came from that parent ID. Other use cases could be you can do it based on process. You can also create one based around the user itself. So if you type in a username, you can pull up anything that user has done as well. So there's some other use cases that can come out of this.
I see someone has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so quick question. That the tool you mentioned basically aggregates a lot of these individual AuditD events into one event, right? And do you remember the primary key being used there to combine these events? Was it the AuditD message ID? Is that the key that they're using to combine these events into one?
Yeah, there was the AuditD ID, which combines all the events together. So each ID is its own little operation. I think I have that still pulled up here.
I'm wondering, since I think from practical perspective, in practice, a lot of customers and clients wouldn't be as enthusiastic in installing yet another container on a log server, but would rather use something like Logstash or Vector or whatever is already in place to parse and ship their logs. So I was wondering if you can use, Logstash, and in our case, it's called Vector, to build something similar and aggregate based on that ID.
It's possible. I ran that idea behind, the Cribble, and looked at them to see if you could do something like on their side with the log forwarder. Something they mentioned was you might be able to pass it off to like a Redis or something like that, and then kind of like hold the values over there, and then as the values come through, it kind of could combine them. I don't know of like a new log application that could actually do that, because they're pretty much like seamless. They just take stuff and then they add or remove and they pass it on. They don't really have like a short-term memory of holding things to kind of like combine the stuff. But if you have the ability to offload to a service that could do that, you have that ability. The only thing I really know is Redis, was because that was tossed my way. I've not had a chance to look into that. I'm working on trying to.
Vector should be able to, actually. So that's why I was wondering, maybe I'll be able to build a parser myself, as long as I know what key I should be able to use to combine these metrics, which in this case is AuditD ID in that case. So I'll take a look if we can do this in Vector, and then I could potentially share this as well.
Yeah, that'd be kind of cool. All right. So for demos, it's basically like, why do you want to do the tagging? It's easy to let the backend, such as AuditD, do all the work where it tags the events. So instead of writing analytics, looking for command lines or syscalls, touching a file or anything like that, you can just use the watching aspect to do that. It just makes it really quick and easy to grab file activity as well. Why would you want to do file access, audit compliance, threat detection, things like that? You can also do it for honeypotting. So you could set up very tempting files that should never be touched or accessed, and then you can let the attackers that ever get in, maybe they scan and touch that as well. We want to go ahead and jump to some demos. So I kind of lost a lot of my fun stuff, which I need to go find. But anyway, so this is what I was using for like testing environment. I've got my AuditD settings on this side. So what I was doing with, I was doing some very basic stuff
Could
with,
you maybe zoom in a bit?
yeah, let me see if I can zoom in. Give me a second. Let me see if this works. All right, how's that?
Better, much better. Thanks.
All right, cool. Yeah, so for my testing, for some of the demos I was doing is I was just logging every syscall for any user ID that was above 1,000, and I was just kind of like tagging it with this. I was also doing some, testing with, the do not touch, and the new PowerPoint, it had an option of showing what this looked like, where if I was to, let's see if this is still active. If I was to touch that file and do, let's see, if I was to do like a nano on it, it's going to come up with a different syscall value than say if I was to do an LS. So something to keep in mind is an LS will trigger a directory watch on a file if you have just read on it. And the same will happen too as if you do like a cat, a tail, a nano. But the one thing I want to kind of demonstrate and show is that the syscalls are going to be a little different. Let's see if I can find that. Well, I'll just manually type this, but and I am going to grab this string. Should be pretty quick here. I'll give it a second here, but the main thing I want to mention is that when it does come through, is there's going to be two different syscalls. There's going to be the LS that has I forget the exact syscall, but it's completely different from the nano. So if you do a watch on a directory where you're monitoring for reading, just be wary that you need to also include which syscall you want to monitor as well, because otherwise you can get false positives if an application or a service just touches or looks at a file when you really want to monitor, did someone actually open the file and look into it. So if we look at this one here, we can go down to the syscall name, which is open at, which is what you want to see, meaning someone actually accessed it with an application that's going to open the file as well. All right, let me run something else too. So I'm going to talk about like ideas and concepts in regards to working with trying to find a 0-day or script execution as well. So some concepts you could do is, because you have 500 something different syscalls of value, we could benchmark or baseline our systems and take a look at what's the most common syscalls that we're seeing being executed on the system. Common ones might be read, write, close. Maybe if we see a spike in those, that could be ransomware hitting something. But we could also go for the low-hanging fruit. If we find ones that we typically don't see, or typically maybe set UID, set ID could be more on the suspicious side. If we shouldn't really be seeing those, we could monitor them. We could also monitor ones that we typically would never find. Other concepts too is like you could go out and download a bunch of payloads, exploits, whatever, execute them and see what syscalls are happening, and then combine them all and kind of like get an idea. Okay, so we see that an exploit, it consists of always these type of syscalls, and that gives us the ability to create detections around scripts being executed and binaries being dropped as well. Another thing too is we could also look around by processes and see what is this process ID doing. So we have for this process we have one just doing this, which is probably the one that we just executed. We have this one, which is probably like a system process, because it's got like 22 distinct different syscalls being made. and we can just keep playing this out and keep going deeper and building more and more options out, and like what exe was ran, what was that syscall, what was the process ID that made it. So, we can keep, playing this out, and, it gives us an idea of like what's going on in the system, and lets us kind of look more into what's actually happening. This one here is another favorite of mine, where it's, and I'll find the PowerPoint that had like all this stuff well documented just so people could have access to these. But this was basically taking, a parent process ID, and I'm just looking for the, executable binaries that are happening with all the different processes underneath it. So this one here was basically just an exploit example of like a shell file being dropped, and we can see that the shell file ran a wget. We can see that it ran a cat. We can see that it also ran a cat again, so it's looking at files, and then we can see that it did an RM. So we can start seeing that even that we're just logging the most basic stuff of just one syscall, which logs all the binaries being executed. We can see that when this script got executed, it did these things. Now, obviously, if this was a actual exploit, it's probably going to do a lot more than just these 4 different binaries, but it gives you insight into a script that's getting executed. So you no longer have you just don't question like, well, we see a script got executed, but we don't know what it did. This gives you insight to see what happened. So these are just like some ideas and examples as to what you can do and really start building in and getting, a deep dive into everything. If you really wanted to log every syscall that, a process did, you have the ability to, get this granular with everything. But, this might be overkill, going this deep, unless you really want to like spend a lot of time filtering and managing all this, because there's a lot of work to, reduce the noise. So I recommend, just sticking with basic command line monitoring instead. So that's kind of like in a nutshell, some threat detection concepts as well. Common ways is I just would use the command line looking for specific paths. Maybe there's Etsy shadow in the command line. Maybe it's, the TMP directory as well is something I would look at as well. And let's see, is this the one that has it? No, this one I think has it. One final concept, I did not get a chance to actually finish this one, but this is basically an idea with a logic app where when a incident gets triggered, we run this logic app, and the idea behind it is we're just trying to build a process tree like this. And the idea is we go up the process till, maybe process 1000, maybe lower. It just depends. You just don't want to hit the system processor init ID, which is 1. Otherwise, when you come back down the process tree, you're going to be mapping every single process on your Linux machine. But the idea behind this was using, KQL to build out a very visual tree of, okay, this was the parent process and it spawned all these, other processes, did these events. So when you have an analyst, you have the ability to, quickly see what happened instead of digging through, a bunch of queries trying to, build the picture. Other ideas is maybe offload this into Python, because coming back down, the process tree is very difficult and complicated because you can have an unlimited amount of child processes for every parent process. So it gets really big, very complicated, and working within logic apps is kind of limiting in that regard when you start having to do all these different for eaches and checks and build arrays and then work with those arrays. But it was an idea that I was kind of like working on, just that there's something out there, as well for community, development ideas. And that's really all I have. I'm sorry that I lost my nice, well put together PowerPoint that I spent last night working on, but I will try and find it and post it for everyone to actually see, because it had a lot of good examples with configuring AuditD as well. So that's all I've got, unless anyone has any more questions.
Sure we do. So For me, I'm mostly, I think 90% of my work is in the Microsoft stack. So if I would like to start with monitoring Linux AuditD, what would be, you said EXECV, but are there
Yes.
any good pointers which syscalls, because they're like 500? How many do you monitor?
So I really mostly, honestly, just use the EXECV one just because cost control, and I'm not really exposed in terms of, at least on the personal side, but on like a business side, I would say I have to actually look. I did not really pay attention to numbers what we use. I just focused mostly on the EXECV one just because that gave me enough. And it actually might be the only one we actually do log where I work at, but it's because it gives you enough information with just the binaries and then the command line. A lot of the other syscalls are useful. Actually, let me bring up this here. This is a great little example. This is actually a pre-built one that's on GitHub. It's got a lot of information, and let me show you down here some ideas in terms of like why you want to use a specific syscalls and stuff. Here we go. So this right here is actually pretty cool. So you can monitor, the ptrace syscall, and add some additional pointers and such, which is basically looking for code injection, register injection, because ptrace is used for injecting into a process. So you don't have to actually monitor every single syscall. You can pick and choose specific ones just based on research and playing around and looking at the very limited research out there currently. You could also do sockets as well if you really care about sockets being created. It might just come down to playing around in your environment, seeing what's noisy, what's not. Because if you're not really doing a lot of networking or a lot of specific things with syscalls, you might just choose to log them just to log them. And that's with like the summarized statement of seeing which syscalls are being actually logged and used in that Linux machine. And you just go for the quiet ones just to have them and kind of see what you can do with them. But if I was to pick any specific syscalls, I'd probably do like a lot of the ones that kind of like look like maybe chmod count. Like this is kind of like the batch IDPies are looking at is ones that do very specific things that you may not see all the time on dedicated servers that are hosting specific sensitive data. People shouldn't probably be coming in and doing changing of file names or permissions and ownerships. But you can also do something very specific and just do above user ID 1000 if it's too noisy. But yeah, it is a good question because there's a lot of syscalls and it's always changing, and it's like which ones matter, which ones don't. And I think it comes down to what kind of threats do you worry about the most, and then which syscalls might cover that, and then just enabling it, seeing what the volume's like, maybe see what you can tune out. But yeah, it's really like a big full-time job because there's a lot of things that you can do, and it's a very noisy environment that I would be worried to even try this on a workstation because there's just so much activity. But yeah, it's a good question because there's a lot of possibilities that you can do with all those syscalls.
Cool.
Cool.
If you make, are there any comparable? I'm totally not a Linux guy, so I apologize upfront. But
Yeah.
I do know that Mark Rusanovich, I believe he also released a sysmon for Linux systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I did play with sysmon, but that was a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's pros and cons with each, but I remember I did enjoy using AuditD more. But another solution too would be Snoopy. Snoopy is basically a command line. It basically does exactly what AuditD does, but it's focused on just like the execv, so it logs, you know, the binaries being executed, the command lines being executed, and it combines all the user information together. The only downside with it is an attacker could technically circumvent it because it's using the LD preload. So it's not really working within the kernel. It's working, I guess, more like on like the LD preload, which you have the ability to load and unload, I guess, DLLs and files and stuff. But it does operate on that level, which I found to be a very quick, you know, I did another article on that one as well, where you just drop it in, easy to configure, and you can have command line logging on a Linux machine in like a matter of 2 minutes, going straight to Sentinel, perfectly parsed out. So it's a very quick and easy option if you don't want to deal with the hassle of managing an AuditD, you know, environment and instance. The only downside is you just don't get syscall logging, you don't get that advanced flexibility or that security of being a kernel module. But it is a very good solution to use if you want to just, you know, get some type of logging that's better than no type of logging.
Yeah, and I assume when we when we go into your work, there's some like recommended minimal configuration from where to start.
We really don't have much. Like, I kind of inherited whatever was originally posted, which I honestly think came from that AuditD article I posted on GitHub. I think most of the stuff that we typically did, we just probably just deployed that and made a few tweaks to it. But that is actually a really good one just to play around with and start with, because a lot of work has gone into that one and filtering out a lot of common noise, filtering out stuff like that. So that'd be a good starting point if you really wanted to like build out, you know, an AuditD environment, is just take that config, see what it looks like, and just kind of like play from there. Because it really is a learning experience, and you can expect to spend a couple of days just to understand the syntax and how to like, you know, work around with it.
Yeah. Another thing you mentioned is basically, well, you know, because it can be so noisy, you recommend to go low and then add or make it more verbose based on the use cases, right, that you come across. Where do you find that information? I mean, is it, you know, based on your own research that after, you know, an attack happened, either in your environment, hopefully not, or, you know, by going through, you know, analytics documentation and kind of, you know, continuously tune to be on par with the common threats, or what's your approach for tuning the AuditD logging continuously?
My concept is, you know, let me go after the low hanging fruit. I know there's, you know, so like the home directory, you can do a rule that looks for, you know, an admin logging into someone else's, you know, home directory just because the UID doesn't match the owner of the UID. So you can do things like that. Those are some easy ones, or ones that really should not have a lot of noise to them. So I like to, you know, start with, you know, some small things like that, monitoring, you know, config files that probably shouldn't be monitored or, you know, touched. Same with, you know, password files, anything like that, even entire directories. So if you have a web application that's running on the internet, and if you're not really pushing a lot of updates to that application, you should be able to monitor and not see files being changed or touched. And if it does happen, you know, was that like an attack attempt? Did they get some type of attack in through an RC or drop a file as well? And, you know, that gives you a lot of good options there. It's just looking for where could an attack happen, and then what could I build around that just to, you know, give me some type of monitoring. That's typically my go-to, is just kind of like, you know, looking for my weak spots and deciding what can I do to build around that.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, unlike the other tools we're sometimes using, where we're grabbing our head like, oh, why we don't have that locked. Basically, here it's the opposite. If you want, you basically have everything, and you need to tune it, I assume, based on your mileage, and of course, also take into account the potential log costs. Or
Yeah.
Are you always ingesting directly into Sentinel, or do you use any other methods, like, you know, bringing stuff into ADX or any other type of storage?
We use a little bit of it. It's mostly Sentinel, but we're slowly working on trying to transition a lot of stuff out of Sentinel and more into like, ADX. And I guess now that new tier where you have like a more of a storage as well, just to reduce the cost. Otherwise, a lot of stuff is also kept in like S3 buckets. But we're trying to transition a lot of stuff out of, Sentinel just to, reduce the amount of logs that aren't really needed in there to make way for ones that actually do matter more.
Yeah. And then maybe one more question. So, you mentioned, it can be quite verbose. Are you using the AMA agent or Logstash or once you have sorted all your things locally and defined the logs you actually want to collect? Did I get that right? You bring it into a pipeline and then through the AMA agent into Sentinel, or?
Yeah, from right now, I mean, for me, I just typically use the AMA agent. I'm working on getting my Cribble instance back up and running and, kind of use that more of my pipeline again. But otherwise, Logstash has always been another one of my favorites to use. I just like using both of those. They give a lot of flexibility, but I do like AMA because it's you just drop it in and you're done.
I believe Sergey also has another question, but it was a couple of minutes ago, so I'm not aware of the context. But his question was, what is the logs onboarding process? Are there any details on the GitHub page? I think he means in regards of Laurel, but if you can clarify, Sergey?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Sorry, I think you just answered that question. It's AMA agent. It's AMA agent, so it's all cool. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but AMA agent actually, I guess Sentinel in general does a pretty good job of just taking a JSON object and parsing it pretty well. So there wasn't really too much to do with that.
So then it's over file and not over the syslog, right?
I believe so, yes. I'd have to double check, but it's one or the other. Whatever the default is what it's currently doing.
Okay.
Sorry, so if we install AMA agent, we'll get the logs ingested into syslog table, right? But I notice you have a different table, AuditD table. How's that table been created?
So for the AuditD one, I believe that is the function I built. So I wrote the parser and then I saved that as a function. So I just called the function there, and I will get that published as well on like GitHub or when I publish the PowerPoint, if I can ever actually find that thing that vanished. But yeah, I will get all the resources out there just so everyone has access to them.
Got it. Thank you.
So by default, you're bringing your data into syslog or the common security log, or?
Syslog is where I typically send it all to. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if one would like, you could basically transform and bring the data into a custom log.
Yep, you could do that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay, well, looking forward to your step-by-step instructions. I definitely gonna give it a little try, as I always like to at least. Well, I always judge things on, okay, do I get this running in an hour or two? Then cool. Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I will definitely make a post on Medium probably by the end of this week with all this information. Because I think my PowerPoint decided to run away and not come back.
Yeah.
So much autosave.
Yeah. Please allow me to ask you, what else, or what's your history with KQL? As we usually also talk about, how did actually people get to KQL? Was it just because, where you worked, you just had to use it, or did you actually find KQL yourself and started to, put one and one together, or?
Yeah. So about 3 years ago, I think now, I was at an MSSP and the whole Sentinel KQL came down the pipeline, and it was given to me to work with, and I just I took that, enjoyed it, and I pretty much ran with it and created a lot of things that actually allowed us to do MSSP things. So I enjoyed it and kept going with it and became pretty good at find new ways to, make things work and work around all the, problems that we'd come across. And ever since then, it's been my main SIM. And now I just use it in a home environment just because it's so easy to spin up and use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Great.
Any other questions? Well, in any case, we'll share everything that you will share with us afterwards. We'll share also in the show notes. And any links that you have, references to your projects.
Yeah, I will definitely get that out.
Yeah. And very cool. Very happy to see yet another way, how to use KQL, especially also for once, a little bit outside of, let's call it, well, at least for me and Johnny, our little bubble that we're in. in the Microsoft security stack. But, as always, it's always good to know, that there are alternatives or, special purpose scenarios where maybe, the out-of-the-box solution might not go or work, or, I've been in customer meetings where they try to, hammer on, why does the out-of-the-box solution, does not provide that and that. And I guess that's also worth knowing that, okay, if someone is really picky and wants to go to the very, very detailed, that we have alternatives available to eventually, do things and get stuff done.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Great. And, I think it's my turn today. For this month, I couldn't decide on any good learning KQL operators. So I decided to have a bit more fun with what did you do this month with KQL, because over the last couple of months we have the Microsoft Graph, the API logs, and I started playing with that. And then at one point I remembered that back last year I had a course from Dirk-Jan Mollema where we played around with the graph and downloading files. And I thought by myself, hey, it would be a nice use case to monitor those kinds of downloads or those kinds of emails being sent or stuff like that. So I started playing around with the graph activity logs, and then I created a detection, and then all of a sudden I thought, well, I should reproduce it, but let's get into it and then I can explain a bit. So first of all, if you want to look at the data of the graph, there's a nice documentation that Microsoft provided where you can have an explanation on how to download stuff from the graph. So you need, for instance, at least file read or size read, or in my demo, I used both just to make sure that I didn't run into any issues, maybe because the root could be at the site level while the files are in the file level. So if you want to play around, use both. And then over here, there are some HTTP requests which you can do. So I started with this in mind. I went to Visual Studio Code. And there what I did is I created a simple script. And not zooming. Now it is. So you have a client ID, client secret, tenant ID. And then you use the script to set up some parameters. I created an authority where I collected a token, and I created a variable for my user principal name because I wanted to download some of my files. Then as always, you can you create a body, and then you collect the authentication, the access token. So let's just do it up until here. So basically now I have a bearer token in here. So if I would do the next step is to connect to the graph, users, my user principal name, and then I have drive root children, which means from my OneDrive on the root, I want to see all children. It's nice. So if we run that command, or this, then we can see in response and a value. So first a count. You can see in here I have 57 items, and the items can be Word templates, folders, everything that is in my personal root. So one of the things why I want to show this is because in the next step we'll be downloading files, but this is also a good way to monitor maybe reconnaissance, because yesterday evening I was playing around with Alex and I downloaded the files and I showed it, and then Alex said, hey, but you can also do this in Office Activity, right? Yes, that's possible, but some activities like this reconnaissance of collecting just the files and folders, it's a good step which you don't see directly in the Office Activity log. So let's just go through the next steps. So from all the items, I will be looking for files, and then I will be downloading them from the Graph API. So users may use a principal name, drive items, and then the file ID, which is this UID, and then I will be saving them. So in this case, let's just do 5 for the demo and say, oh, I can continue it. And over here, so I downloaded a bit more than 5 for some reason. Oh, right. Okay, it liked downloading files. So, but over here we have 9 files which we downloaded. So let's go to KQL to see what, where, and how we can see. If we go to my Sentinel instance, so this will take a while. So I'll start with the data of yesterday evening, because I was playing around, and at first my original detection was to just have a look for result type 200, which just should return all my downloads. And this is fun. Now it's returning some, but not all of them. And also the strange thing is yesterday I downloaded about, wait, maybe it's if I remove this bit. Yeah, so there's no downloads. So let's go back to where it was. That's one of the strange things which I noticed, that if you download files through an app registration, the data doesn't have a 200 return code, but it returns a 302. I'm not sure why it does this, but this is the current behavior. So over here we can see that I'm accessing all the content pages, and in the content, if you access this, then you get the file if you have the right permissions. So this is a good way to detect downloads. And if you look at the KQL, the easy parts, graph activity logs, the request method is a get, because post or other methods, it doesn't make sense to review if you're looking for downloads. And then what I did here is, at first I wanted to make a nice string where I had all the options or do several options. But then I decided to use regex, which in this case works quite fast, because with match regex, you can use regex to improve your queries. So for instance, here between the brackets, I have the beta and the V1 because the API is available in those types. And what I saw in this query was, if I go back to the documents, I can see that for listing files and also getting files, you have it's in drives, groups, me, sites, users. And if we see in get item, because that's the API for collecting, we can see drives, groups, me, sites, users. And for some reason, okay, that's not here. Download file, sorry. So over here, we have these, and then we have /content in the end. Or if you want to save it to a different format, then we have the /content format, and then you can append which format you want to download your files to. So that is what I did here. So I have the first bits, and then it should end with this or should contain this, because the format, if you do a whatever 1, 2, 3 as format, then it will probably store it as a text file, but you can't just mention all formats here. So I did a contains, because you can't do a hash, because it's not just string values. It also has alphanumerical and other characters. So the first step was like this, and then I can easily see also the new file. So we have like 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10. It's odd. Why do we have 10 now? Because we only downloaded 9. Let's see. Maybe the PowerShell script did access the 10th one and didn't report it yet. But it's there. And the next step, because in my script, I used this bit. So I called this API and then added my user principal name and then did drive root children for the files. So if you want to monitor for reconnaissance, like I said before, then we can also do that in the KQL. So we can say this one. As you can see, I ran it twice. And so this is a good way to catch this specific reconnaissance. So in the end, what you can also do is look in the documentation to see if there are any nice endpoints here, maybe check in or check out files, or maybe share files would also be a nice one. And also, if we go, we can send mail, or near the send mail, there should also be list messages. As you can imagine, if I would be a hacker, I would like to go through a user's messages. I don't have to go through the portal, but I can use just the Graph API. And also, if you download files, it's not always, well, the downloading we saw yesterday was, but some of the reconnaissance parts aren't monitored in the Office activity.
Yeah.
So in this
maybe
case,
to add also,
yeah.
Johnny, that in the graph, perfect to monitor reconnaissance, but what we notice is that when you actually download the files, you get a pointer, but you don't have the file name in the graph. And yeah, that's what made me spontaneously think of, hey, hold a second, we have the Office activity logs where you can filter on the workload. If you do a distinct workload, you will see all the workloads that are sending. So typically, if you would have Defender for Cloud Apps enabled, you will get the Office activity logs for OneDrive, SharePoint. And there, of course, you will see the effective download as well, and the file name. Because in Graph, you would basically, if you would have a detection, you would have that report ID or that number. And then you, as an analyst, would actually have to go back and, well, execute the same command, maybe in PowerShell, where then you would see a file name. Yeah. So I don't know if that's on purpose or maybe a glitch in the graph logging. But yeah, we noticed that the download doesn't show the actual file name in the log itself.
So there are good ways to choose either to monitor through Office activity or the graph activity logs. And like I said, you can also think of email events or maybe other management tasks, which can also be performed by the Microsoft Graph. So it's a good place to set up some monitoring and to play around a bit with the data.
Yeah, and maybe also to add one more thing. I mean, like we concluded before, yes, if a customer has Defender for Cloud Apps, you're probably just going to turn that on because those Office activity logs are free. But what if you don't have Defender for Cloud Apps in your environment? And I think that's a cool thing, that there's always maybe a second option how to get to your goal. Yeah.
Good. Any questions about the graph?
Good. Then shall we make a funny announcement, Johnny?
Oh, what kind, Alex? What kind? Do tell.
Okay, so Johnny and I have been brewing an idea, and I just thought we'd bring this exclusively in this episode. We all love KQL, and we really appreciate you spending your time 1.5 hours every month. We thought, we want to do something more, so we were able to find some other friends in the universe of KQL. And on the 8th of November, so mark that day, postpone dinner, wherever you are, we will be running a online conference called KustoCon. And I leave it with that. So we're working hard on the schedule, working with the people who told us, yeah, we're in. So preparing the sessions, and very soon we'll use the same platform, Meetup, for you to register and to RSVP and to get the link, that sort of stuff. It's totally free. And we just hope to have some joyful time with KQL throughout the day. There will be various sessions, and hopefully for everyone there's something in there. Maybe if you have friends or buddies in your team that you feel like they could need some inspiration, again, mark November 8th. It's a Friday. It starts at around 2 o'clock CET. And we'll go with a little break in between until about 8 o'clock in the evening.
Yes, and also a good friend of the show, Bert Jan, is also joining us to spend a bit of time with us. There's also another stack of good speakers. I think most of them have been on the show, but some of them, most of them have been on the show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we'll be live physically in one place, running this, and our audience will be online. Let's see where this gets us. Maybe we manage to do something hybrid or in person throughout next year. We're looking into that as well, but we kind of let the balloon go up and see whether there's an interest for people to attend a virtual conference just on KQL. Yeah. Good. Yes. And if there's no more questions, let me double check the chats.
I think we can give a big thanks to Truvis for joining us today.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for making your time available and sharing your you're live in KQL
Yeah.
with this.
Thanks.
And to the audience, yeah, thanks for joining, for being a live attendee. And yeah, next September, we're not 100% sure what we're going to do. We might broadcast out of the Workplace Ninja Summit, where Jenny and I are also engaged. And that's exactly in the last Tuesday of the month. And then I'm going to be on vacation. But we'll definitely be back in October, where we also have a very cool guest in the pipeline. So go to KQL.com, KQLCafe.com, and there you'll find the upcoming agenda and the upcoming sessions. Thank you for joining.
Thanks,
Bye,
all.
guys.
Bye.